Well, hello, everybody. This is Bob Woosley, National Private Equity Practice Leader with FD, and welcome to another edition of Private Equity 360. And this is going to be a good one. I've been looking forward to this one, very timely. We're going to talk a little bit about the tax law that could happen if Joe Biden became president. And I know that this is going to be an interesting discussion for all of us here. The particular lens that we're going to look at this subject is really going to be through the lens of transactions. I'm joined by some great people here that have different viewpoints or perspectives on this. First, I'd like to introduce Scott Rhodes, who is an investment banker with Bowstring Advisors. Scott, why don't you introduce yourself, then I'm going to go to Leanne to introduce herself, and then we'll go right into this, what could be a very hot topic. So Scott, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Bob, and thank Fraser and Dieter for including me in this timely discussion. As the election gets closer, I feel like my M&A outlook is being shaken like a snow globe. So hopefully we'll provide a little bit of clarity here during this discussion. But as you said, I'm an investment banker with Citizens M&A Advisory. Our Atlanta-based firm, Bowstring Advisors, was acquired by Citizens last year. For those of you who don't know much about Citizens, they're a top 10 commercial bank, and over the last couple of years, they've built a large M&A capability with about 80 plus bankers. Most of our clients are sell side. They're a mix of privately owned, founder owned, and private equity backed. We're middle market focused, enterprise value typically less than 500 million. My personal career, it's had an interesting perspective on deals. I've been an investment banker, a corporate development executive, as well as a CEO who sold his business. I was a banker with Bank of America and Robinson Humphrey. I led M&A for Equifax, and I was the CEO of a business called Bagster that we sold to Waste Management. So certainly, I guess that means that I'm old, but have a unique perspective on deals and have been through a lot of cycles. And you know, every time we have one of these, they're all different and have their own unique characteristics and impacts.
Scott, thank you. And when you say we've had one of these, that's an interesting take, because I don't know if I've ever, I'm an old guy like you. I'm not sure I've ever seen one of these before. Leanne is one of a tax partner, a senior tax partner in Fraser and Dieter. Leanne, why don't you introduce yourself and give a little bit about your background, and we'll kind of dive into the subject.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. As Bob said, I'm LeighAnn Costley. I'm an equity partner on the tax department side at Fraser and Dieter. My practice is comprised primarily of privately owned businesses and the owner operators of those businesses, as well as other high net worth individuals. And I work with them from a tax planning and estate planning side, business succession planning, compliance and strategy related to their federal tax and state tax issues, primarily in the manufacturing and distribution space, but also in technology and real estate as well. And I've been with Fraser and Dieter for almost 9 years now. Before that, I spent the vast majority of my career at Deloitte, both in Detroit and in Atlanta.
Thanks, Leanne. And it's interesting because when Scott, your firm asked Leanne to give your investment bankers a briefing about her view on the Biden, what could be the Biden tax law, quote unquote, I listened in on that, and I said, I thought, my viewers are going to really want to hear this. And so that prompted this session. So thank both of you guys for coming here. So Leanne, give us some headlines. And by the way, for our listeners, this is not going to be a webinar. We're going to take down a bunch of detailed things. We really want to stay high level here, and really, again, think about how's this impacting the velocity and the psychology around the sellers that you represent, Scott, and interact with. So Leanne, why don't you give us some headlines of what could happen if Joe Biden wins and tax law, comes into the tax law he has published comes into effect.
Sure. So before we go about where things could go, let's talk a little bit about where things are currently and how we got here. So President Trump's administration, one of their first and probably signature achievements in the first year of the administration was what is called the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017. And so most people know that with a Republican president, a Republican Senate, and a Republican House, they were able to accomplish this major tax cut on both the corporate and individual side fairly quickly. He was sworn in January. The tax cut bill was passed in December, and it made a lot of changes to the law that stood at the time. And where we currently stand with that law is there was a corporate tax cut pretty dramatically. The highest rate for corporate taxes prior to 2017 was 35%, and we're now at 21%. So a 14% rate differential. On the individual side, there were also tax cuts, not as substantial as the corporate side. The top rate went from 39.6 to 37%. There were some other changes to the individual tax situation. There was a doubling in the standard deduction, which helps out lower to middle income Americans. And there were some other things that they put through in the bill related to estate taxes and other things that they had to pass under what's called reconciliation, meaning that a lot of they couldn't come to an agreement without having what we call a sunset provision, meaning that a lot of the individual provisions in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act expire after a period of time, so that the revenue decreased from the lower tax rates will only be in effect for a certain number of years. And so a lot of those provisions on the individual side only last through 2025, which is relevant to this discussion because a lot of people keep asking, both how soon could a Biden tax cut or tax plan change happen, and also when it might take effect. And that's why I think it's important to look at history in terms of the current administration and what they did and how quickly they did it before we consider what a Biden administration might do.
Yeah, and I know you're going to go into the dynamic of what happened to the Senate in addition to a change in the presidency as well. And that's going to be an interesting, your take on that. Scott, what are you hearing in terms of fear or apprehension about a change in the tax law from the sellers you work with?
We've certainly seen M&A volumes come back post-COVID. All of our transactions were paused during the heavy quarantine period as we all took stock of how performance was going to be affected and how the markets might perform. But the fundamentals remain solid. So for COVID durable businesses, all those processes have restarted and are going well. I think next year is the big wild card. Certainly, if there is a blue wave, it will have a major impact on the M&A markets. And a lot of it is around timing uncertainty. And I know Leanne will get into this, but from what we've heard from the experts like Leanne, it's likely that if those tax changes were passed, they'd be effective beginning calendar 2022. Mm-hmm. But we're not going to know until we know. So I think what we're going to see, it affects founders very differently than private equity firms. So I think for founder-owned businesses, they're going to be in a real limbo period, sitting on the sidelines, waiting to see the outcome of the presidency, when these tax changes might become effective under a blue wave. If they're not effective until 2022, you could see a very strong 2021, especially the back half, as people launch transactions during the beginning of the year. So just, I think there's just a lot of uncertainty right now as people chart their courses. We think this year will continue to see stronger M&A volumes as people try to get deals done before year end.
The way the tax law, the way any law change works is that if Biden wins the election, unless the Senate also flips to Democratic control, there's going to be no change, because there's not, if the Republicans still control the Senate, anything Joe Biden wants to do from a policy change is going to be, met with complete, deadlock or gridlock, sorry. As a lot of things currently are now, right? So with a Democratic House and a Senate and a Republican Senate. So I think it's important to note that the apprehension of what could happen with a Biden presidency is only potentially going to play out if there's also a blue a democratically controlled Senate, a blue wave, as Scott said. So if the Democrats don't flip the Senate, all of the discussion about what Biden wants to do from a tax change standpoint is moot. It's not going to be, it's not going to be relevant. But I also think from a timing standpoint, as I mentioned about the Trump administration, if the Democrats do control both the House and the Senate and Biden wins the presidency, if tax changes are the highest thing on Joe Biden's priority list, which they were on Donald Trump's, then I think you're probably looking at a similar time frame. He gets inaugurated in January. He puts the tax bill, to the committees in the House and the Senate, tells them what he wants to do. They debate for months, they negotiate. It might get passed by the end of 2021, maybe, and then go into effect in 2022. Very few tax law changes are retroactively effective. Some of them are effective on the day that the law passes, but almost all of them, because of just the burden of compliance, and you get too late in the year, the IRS has already changed their forms to so that they can be released in January, and so there's very little practical application of a tax law change late in the year being effective in the year it passes. So I agree completely that there's unlikely anything to happen to tax rates for 2021. I also don't think that a tax bill from Joe Biden administration with a democratically controlled House and Senate will be a bundle of both corporate and individual changes. I personally think that they're going to divide and conquer, because if you may or may not remember, one of the things that the Obama administration proposed but could not pass was a lowering of the corporate rate from 35% to 28%. And so Biden's already on board with a 28% tax rate, which is what he's now proposing, increase that corporate rate from 21 to 28. So they've already, felt that out in, several years ago. Certainly it's not as popular as the 21% rate is from a corporate standpoint, but it's not going all the way back. It's splitting the difference between the 35% rate that we had prior to the Trump administration. So I think that's kind of low-hanging fruit, and they would probably do a corporate change before they do any individual changes, also because of this reconciliation process that I spoke about a few minutes ago, in that a lot of the individual changes that the Trump bill made expire in a few years. That all being said, I'm not sure a tax law change is going to be the highest priority of a Joe Biden administration in January and February, given the pandemic, given the healthcare situation, and who knows where we'll be 6 months from now.
So the earliest, you're saying the earliest it could go if Biden got elected, if he followed the same fast pattern that Trump did, would be December 2021.
It could be October, November, but that would be really quick.
Yeah, that's about as fast as you could see, and it probably would not be retroactive. That actually feeds into what Scott was saying, in that, say it's a complete blue wave, you could see a really active first and second quarter, right, Scott, or third quarter in terms of M&A transactions. And maybe we ought to talk a little bit about what is the bugaboo, what is the big fear factor in the Biden law that would cause this accelerated activity for sellers. Right. Leanne, maybe you can, or both you and Scott could comment. What's the big fear factor on the transaction side that would cause that acceleration?
Yeah, well, if you're an owner, operator, a founder, it's really a double-edged sword with both sides pointing at you. If you're going to sell your business, you're going to have the higher capital gains tax. And just to illustrate that, for a business that was sold at 10 times EBITDA, under the Biden plan, it would have to be sold for 13.2 times EBITDA to realize the same after-tax benefit. So it's a significant impact on a founder who's paying that individual capital gains rate. Mm-hmm. Now, for private equity firms, the difference is more muted. Their LPs typically don't pay capital gains. The partners do on the carried interest. So, they're going to be taxed more like us W-2 earners. But from what I've understand from private equity firms, they don't see a change in tax policy pulling forward any of their plans to exit their businesses.
Are you seeing, if we get to some kind of normality when, the supply of good companies with decent EBITDA kind of shrink, you see the private equity buyers having to pay a premium to cover that tax?
good question. My guess is that they're going to be looking at their total returns, and that the owners will have to absorb part of that. We were already seeing a little bit of weakness in the first quarter. M&A volumes were down about 9%. Year to date, they're down, I think, closer to 17%, given COVID. We're seeing valuations for deals that we're getting done now. They're holding steady to our kind of pre-COVID valuation expectations. So I think that's a good sign, and it's a healthy market. The M&A fundamentals are solid, as you know. The lending markets are functioning well, unlike the last recession. Their balance sheets are strong. The private equity firms certainly, and the strategics have cash to invest. So I think, I've looked at some studies. I want to say on average valuations this year, I think most of them are down, but down less than 10%. So holding steady. But the idea of a premium to offset capital gains seems even robust for my investment banker, glass half full eyes.
To expand about what Scott said in terms of the owner operator and the potential tax impact of a Biden law change, one of the things that Biden has proposed is eliminating the capital gains reduced rate. Currently, capital gains are 20% regardless of your marginal income tax bracket. So if you're in the highest bracket of 37%, you're only paying 20% on your long-term capital gains. What Biden has proposed is getting rid of that 20% bracket for people making over $1 million. So certainly the owner operators in an M&A transaction would be subject to an additional 17% tax on the sale of their business. And Scott also mentioned carried interest. Carried interest is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot related to tax law discussion. It's gotten thrown around in a lot of elections. It's not getting thrown around in this one, mostly because both, the news cycle is dominated by coronavirus, but also because the carried interest provision isn't really a provision that exists in, carried interest is not defined by the statute, but the capital gains piece of carried, taxing carried interest would go away under this $1 million threshold for eliminating the capital gains rate. So we're not talking specifically about one type of capital gain and whether it should be taxed differently than it currently is. We're talking about all capital gains for certain high tax paying individuals, high income earning individuals.
Elizabeth Warren introduced the Stop Wall Street Looting Act, which did address carried interest and other reforms for private equity. So I don't want your private equity viewers to think they're completely immune to this, Bob, so that they might see some impact.
It seems that the consensus would be, okay, A, it's got to be a Democratic sweep.
Correct.
That's number one, A or one. Two, nothing would probably happen until at least, October, November in 2021, right? And if that happens, I guess we're talking about there is a strong motivation to sell, right? To sell before that fourth quarter at a minimum or Q1 2022. So it could be a super active year, right, Scott?
Yeah, especially if they signal to us before the law is passed that they don't plan for it to be retroactive. I think you'll see a rush to the exits, especially since we have some pent-up supply of companies that have probably thought about launching a process but have been on the sidelines with COVID and focused on their business performance. So if they signal to us that it will not be retroactive, I think we'll see a very active 2021. Absolutely.
Well, I was just going to ask Scott if he thinks it's going to pick up even immediately following the election. The election's November 3rd. So the new Congress doesn't get seated until January 3rd, and a new president wouldn't take effect till January 20th. So that's several weeks. But people, like you said, people have been on the sidelines. Do you think that they will jump into the ring if there is a blue wave in November? Sort of at post-election.
I think people will start to plan for those processes and probably wait to launch the public phase, the public marketing phase once they have clarity around timing, if it'll be retroactive or not. But we will certainly be encouraging prospective clients to start the planning process early in the year so that they are ready to go once we have that clarity.
Now, one other thing I would say in terms of the M&A process is that it's really important when a company is looking to sell and working with an investment banker like Scott and Citizens to also involve not only the attorneys related to the process, but also their tax advisors, because so many times you bring the tax advisors in way too late into the negotiation process, and the structure of the deal could have, changed the tax scenario related to the sale for either the owner operator's benefit or the PE firm's benefit, as long as there's, adequate planning involved. It's an important piece of the puzzle that sometimes gets, 11th hour attention.
Sure. And we see that, buyer diligence is more comprehensive than ever. And, sellers need to be prepared for that. We encourage all of our clients to get a sell side QFE done in advance of a process, just so we're super prepared. So, by my hunch is that Q1 period, it'll be, heavy prep. So people are ready to launch, to take advantage of that window before it closes.
Completely agree.
And it sounds like they'll have adequate time to get prepared too. I mean, Leanne, I know there's some generational, family planning you can do that's far enough before transaction, not just the transaction structure itself, but setting up trust and things like that. So
absolutely.
This is kind of what I wanted to accomplish. I didn't want to get too deep, but I think that we've got some interesting dynamics to watch. I was going to ask you guys for a prediction, so let's go ahead and do that. So, Leanne, what's your prediction? And then Scott, I'll go to you. Then we'll wrap up.
Well, you know that I live with a political pundit, so who's
right,
very in tune, or thinks he's in tune with the situation. So I think it's likely that there will be a Biden presidency. I think it is less certain whether or not the Senate will flip. I think it's possible, but I think that it's going to be, seat by seat. It's there are certainly some races that could go Democratic, but I don't think it is a certainty. And I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't, but that's my prediction.
It's going to change every day, I think. But and by the way, it's September 22nd right now, just so everybody can know where we are. But Scott, what about you? What's your if you're a betting man, what's your prediction?
Yeah. Well, since Big Brother at Citizens might be listening in, right. This is not a preference. This is just a view. I think we'll continue to have divided government. A Biden presidency, obviously with the House staying with the Democrats and the Senate staying with the Republicans. So from a tax policy standpoint, more status quo.
Yeah, I'm going to predict that there's going to be gridlock, but I'm not going to tell you which side. So I'm going to, it could go a couple different ways, right? But no, this has been great, guys. And so our listeners and viewers will have your information at the end of this video. So if they want to contact you, I highly recommend, Scott, that we think very highly of you. You're a fantastic resource, and be able to walk your clients, especially if this all plays out, to be able to really prep for this. And it kind of a strange kind of way. If it goes all blue, we're all going to be really busy,
really
in
busy.
2021. So we don't want our clients to pay more tax, but at the same time, that could be an interesting year. Leanne, thank you so much for your perspective on this as well. I want to say, have any parting comments?
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Hopefully the snow globe is not cloudier after this presentation.
Thanks for listening to one of Frazier and Dieter's branded podcasts. To learn more, connect with us on LinkedIn or visit us at FrazierDieter.com, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.